Good evening from the Gifted Classroom in Hamilton Middle School. Welcome to the first and only Vice Presidential Debate of 2020. It is my honor to moderate this debate. I'd like to introduce our two candidates, California Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence. Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here. I'll begin a segment by posing a question to each of you, sometimes the same question, sometimes a different question on the same topic. You will then have 2 minutes to answer without interruption by me or the other candidate. These are tumultuous times, but we can and will have a respectful exchange about the big issues facing our nation. Let's begin with the ongoing pandemic that has cost our country so much. Senator Harris, the coronavirus is not under control. Over the past week, Johns Hopkins reports that 39 states have had more COVID cases over the past 7 days than in the week before. 9 states have set new records. Even if a vaccine is released soon, the next administration will face hard choices. What would a Biden administration do in January and February that a Trump administration wouldn't do? Would you impose new lockdowns for businesses and schools and hotspots? A federal mandate to wear masks? You have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Thank you, Susan. Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the Vice President and President were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They are informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it will be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew it was happening, and they didn't tell you. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew, and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all that, today, they still don't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Well, Joe Biden does, and our plan is about what we need to do around a national strategy for contact tracing, for testing, for administration of the vaccine, and making sure that it will be free for all. That is the plan that Joe Biden has and that I have, knowing that we have to get a hold of what has been going on and we need to save our country. And Joe Biden is the best leader to do that. And frankly, this administration has forfeited their
Thank you, Senator Harris.
right to re-election based on
Thank
this.
you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, more than 210,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 since February. The U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population is higher than that of almost every other wealthy nation on earth. For instance, our death rate is 2.5 times that of Canada next door. You have the administration's coronavirus task force. Why is the U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population higher than that of almost every other wealthy country? And you have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for hosting this event. And Senator Harris, it is a privilege to be on the stage with you. And our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who have returned from China, President Donald Trump did what no other American president has ever done. And that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed the decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that the decision alone by President Trump brought us invaluable time to stand up against the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because with that time, we were able to reinvent testing. More than 115 million tests have been done to date. We were able to see the delivery of billions of supplies, so our doctors and nurses had the resource support they needed. And we began, really, before the month of February, we started to develop a vaccine, develop medicines and therapeutics that have been saving lives all along the way. And under President Trump's leadership, Operation Warp Speed, we believe that we literally have tens of millions of doses of vaccine before the end of the year. The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. And quite frankly, when I look at their plan, that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. And I think the American people should know that this is a president who has put the health.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. Senator Harris, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss, and the vice president is the head of the task force who knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then, thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then, when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't you tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm.
Susan, I have to weigh in here.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
You can have 15 more seconds, and then we'll give it to the Vice President a chance to respond.
Thank you. So I want to ask the American people, how calm were you when you were panicking about where you were going to get your next roll of toilet paper? How calm were you when your kids were sent home from school and you didn't know when they would go back? How calm were you when your children couldn't see your parents because you were afraid they could kill them?
Let's give Vice President a chance to respond. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute to respond.
There's not a day gone by that I haven't thought of every American family that's lost a loved one. And I want all of you to know that you'll always be in our hearts and in our prayers. But when you say the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made.
I'm referring to the president.
But the reality, if I may finish, Senator, the reality is Dr. Fauci said everything he told the president in the Oval Office. The president told the American people. Now, President Trump, I will tell you, has boundless confidence in the American people. He's always spoke with confidence in the American people. Confidence that we'll get through this together. But when you say that hasn't worked, that's disrespectful. When Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx our medical experts came to us in the second week of March, they said if the president didn't take an unprecedented step in shutting down roughly half of the American economy, we could lose 2.2 million Americans. That's the reality, and that's what we did. Senator Harris, you are entitled to your opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage to be a leader.
Which we've always done.
Speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves. But this administration stood on information that, if you had as a parent, if you had as a worker, knowing you didn't have enough money saved up, and now you're standing in a food line because of the ineptitude of an administration that was unwilling to speak the truth to the American people. So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration. It is asking too much of the people.
Susan, we've talked about it.
It is asking too much of the people. That they would not be equipped with the information that they need to help themselves, to protect their parents and their children.
For life to get back to normal, Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it? And Senator Harris, would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice President Pence?
The reality is we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time. An unheard of time. In less than a year. We have 5 companies in phase 3 clinical trials. And we're right now producing tens of millions of doses. So the fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think it's ridiculous. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is we'll have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year, and we'll have the capacity to save countless American lives. And your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine is just, it's unacceptable. And let me also say, the reality is, when you talk about failure in an administration, we actually know what failure looks like in a pandemic. It was 2009. The swine flu arrived in the United States. Thankfully, it ended up not being as lethal as the coronavirus. But before the end of the year, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, Now 7.5 million people contracted the swine flu. 60 million Americans contracted the swine flu. If the swine flu has been as lethal as the coronavirus, in 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, we would have lost 2 million American lives. His own chief of staff, Ron Klain, would say, last year it was just pure luck what they did. Everything possible was wrong. And we learned from that. They left a strategic national stockpile empty. They left an empty and a hollow plan. But we learned from it. And I think the American people, I'm going to say again, can be proud of what we have done. And Senator, please stop undermining confidence in a vaccine.
The next question is about the economy. This has been another aspect of life for Americans. It's been so affected by this coronavirus. We have a jobs crisis brewing. Would raising taxes put the recovery at risk? And Senator Harris, you have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
Thank you. On the issue of the economy, I think there couldn't be a more fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing, which is why he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, leading to a $2 trillion deficit that the American people were going to have to pay for. On day one, Joe Biden will repeal that tax bill. He'll get rid of it. And what he'll do with the money is invest it in the American people.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence?
When President Trump and I took office, America had gone through the slowest economic recovery time since the Great Depression. Is when Joe Biden was vice president. They tried to tax and spend and regulate and bail our way back into a growing economy. President Trump cut taxes across the board. Despite what Senator Harris says, the average American family of 4 had $2,000 in saving in taxes. And with the rise of wages that occurred, we predominantly, for blue-collar, hardworking Americans, the average household income for a family of 4 increased to $4,000 following President Trump's tax cuts. But America, you just heard Senator Harris tell you, on day one, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. It's really remarkable to think.
That's not what I said.
I mean, right after a time where we're going through a pandemic that lost 22 million jobs at the height, we've already added back 11.6 million jobs because we had a president who cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, fought for free and fair trade, and secured $4 trillion from the Congress of the United States to give direct payment to families, saved 50 million jobs through the Paycheck Protection Program. We literally have spared no expense to help the American people and the American worker through this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to raise taxes. They want to bury our economy under a $2 trillion Green New Deal, which you were one of the original co-sponsors of in the United States Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'd like to talk about China. Vice President Pence, how would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Competitors, adversaries, enemies? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Susan. Well, before I leave that, let me speak to the voting records if I can. Everybody knows NAFTA costs literally thousands of American factories to vote. We saw automotive jobs go south of the border. President Trump fought to renegotiate NAFTA. In the United States, Mexico, and Canada, the agreement is now the law of the land. American people deserve to know Senator Kamala Harris was one of the only 10 members of the Senate to vote against the USMCA. It was a huge win for American auto workers. It was a huge win for American farmers, especially dairy in the upper Midwest. But Senator, you said it didn't go far enough on climate change. You put the radical environment agenda ahead of the American auto workers and ahead of the American jobs. I think the American people deserve to know that is probably why Newsweek magazine said that Kamala Harris was one of the most liberal members in the United States Senate in 2019. More liberal than Bernie Sanders. More liberal than any others in the United States Senate. So now, with regard to China, Susan, first and foremost, China is to blame for the coronavirus, and President Trump is not happy about that. He's made that very clear, made it clear again today, that China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel get into China and get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February. Fortunately, President Trump is dealing with China from the outset of this administration. Standing up to China has been taking advantage of America for decades in the wake of Joe Biden's cheerleading for China. President Trump has made that decision before the end of January to suspend all travel from China. And again, the American people deserve to know Joe Biden opposed President Trump's decision to suspend all travel from China. He said it was hysterical, he said it was racist and xenophobic.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked the Vice President. How would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Are we competitors, adversaries, enemies? You'll have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Susan, the Trump administration's perspective and approach to China has resulted in the loss of American lives, American jobs, and America's standing. There is a weird obsession that President Trump has had with getting rid of whatever accomplishment was achieved by President Obama and Vice President Biden. For example, they created within the White House an office that basically was responsible for monitoring pandemics. They got rid of it.
Not true.
Let's look at the job situation. Pew, a reputable research firm, has done an analysis that shows that leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect the head of the Chinese Communist Party than they do Donald Trump. The President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is where we are today because of a failure of leadership by this administration. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country. And because of Donald Trump's unilateral approach to the foreign policy, coupled with his isolationism, he pulled us out and has made America less safe. So Susan, it's about relationships. And the thing that has always been a part of the strength of our nation, in addition to our great military, has been that we keep our word. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that because he doesn't understand what it means to be honest.
Vice President Pence, let me give you a chance to respond.
Thank you. Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved to the American Embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that, and they never did. We stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our allies across the Asia-Pacific. We've stood strong against those who would do us harm. When President Trump came to office, ISIS had captured an area in the Middle East, the size of Pennsylvania. But President Trump unleashed the American military with our armed forces, destroyed the ISIS caliphate, and took down their leader, al-Baghdadi, without one American casualty. Al-Baghdadi was responsible for the death of thousands. But notably, America's hearts today are still with the family Kayla Mueller. Recently, 2 of the ISIS killers were responsible for Kayla Mueller's murder were brought to justice in the United States. So we destroyed the ISIS caliphate, and you talk about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the last administration transferred $1.8 billion into the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the middle of the night.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. In March, Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician in Louisville, was shot and killed after police officers executing a search warrant in an aquatics investigation broke into her apartment. The police said they identified themselves. Taylor's boyfriend said he didn't hear them do that. He used a gun registered to himself to fire a shot, which wounded an officer. The officers then fired 20 more rounds into the apartment. They say they were acting in self-defense. None of them have been indicted in connection with her death. Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so. And I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT first to learn what's going on out on the street, so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken tragically and violently. And it brings me to the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. And people around our country of every race, of every age, of every gender, perfect strangers to each other, marched shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, fighting for us to finally achieve that ideal of equal justice under law. And I was part of those peaceful protests. And I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. And that's what Joe Biden and I have said on this subject. Look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd and I will immediately would be alive. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, our hearts break for the loss of any innocent American life, and the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. And it's really remarkable that a former prosecutor, you would just assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong, but you're entitled to your opinion, Senator. I think, and with regard to George Floyd, there is no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. Justice will be served, but there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it's really just astonishing. Flora Westbrook lost her life's business, her salon, from these riots. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. It was burned to the ground by looters and rioters, and Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that America is systematically racist, and that is Joe Biden said he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. I want everyone to know who puts the uniform on in law enforcement every day. President Trump, and I stand with you. And it is remarkable when Senator Tim Scott tried to pass a police reform bill, brought together groups of Republicans and Democrats. Senator Harris, you got up and walked out of the room. Then you filibustered Senator Tim Scott's bill on the Senate floor that would be provided new accountability, new repeat resources. We do not have to choose between supporting law enforcement, improving public safety, and supporting our African American neighbors and all of our minorities. Under President Trump's leadership,
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
we will always stand with law enforcement, and we'll do what we've done.
Vice President Pence, thank you. Your time is up. Senator Harris?
I will not sit here and be lectured by the Vice President on what it means to enforce the laws of our country. The only one on this stage who has personally prosecuted everything from child sexual assault to homicide. I'm the only one on this stage who has prosecuted the big banks for taking advantage of America's homeowners. I'm the only one on this stage who prosecuted for-profit colleges for taking advantage of our veterans. And the reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days where last week the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And it wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it. And then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. He, on the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed. And on the other side, there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial slurs, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said, there were fine people on both sides. This is who we have as a president of the United States of America. You deserve better. Joe Biden will be a president who brings our country together and recognizes the beauty in our diversity and the fact that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
Vice President, let me give you a minute to respond.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that very much. I think this is one of the things that makes people dislike the media so much in this country, Susan, is that you selectively edit, just like Senator Harris did, comments that President Trump and I and others on our side make. I mean, Senator Harris conveniently admitted after the president made comments about the people on either side of the debate over monuments, he condemned the people on either side of the debate over monuments. The KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, and has done so repeatedly. You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all the American people. But you talk about having personally prosecuted. I'm glad you brought that up your record, Senator. I really need to make this point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General in California, you increased disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. You did nothing on the criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the first step back on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is, your record speaks for itself.
Thank you, Vice President. There is no more important issue than the final issue that we're going to talk about tonight, and that's the issue of the election itself.
He attacked my record. I would like now an opportunity to respond to.
Let me give you 30 seconds because we're really running out of time.
I appreciate that. First of all, having served as the Attorney General of the state of California, the work that I did is a model of what our nation needs to do, and we will be able to do under Joe Biden presidency. Our agenda includes what this administration has failed to do.
Senator Harris, thank you. I have to make time for this last question. I want to close tonight's debate with this question posed by Brecklin Brown. She's an 8th grader at Springville Junior High in Springville, Utah. And here's what she wrote. When I watch the news, all I see is arguing between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizen fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are two candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along? And then she added, your examples could make all the difference to bring us together. So to each of you in turn, I'd like you to take 1 minute and respond to Brecklin. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute.
Brecklin, it's a wonderful question. And let me just condemn you for taking an interest in public life. I started following the news when I was very young. And in America, we believe in a free and open exchange of debate. I look at the relationship between Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice who we just lost from the Supreme Court, and the late Justice Antonin Scalia were on the polar opposites of the Supreme Court of the United States. One very liberal, one very conservative. But what's been learned since her passing was that the two of them and their families were the closest of friends. Here in America, we can disagree. We can debate vigorously, as Senator Harris and I have done on the stage tonight. But when the debate is over, we come together as Americans. And that's just what people do in big cities and small towns across the country. So I just want to encourage you, Brecklin. I want you to tell you that we're going to work every day to have a government as good as our people. And the American people, each and every day, love a good debate. We love a good argument. We always come together and are always there for each other in times of need. And we've especially learned that through the difficulties of this year.
Thank you, Vice President. Senator Harris, what would you say to Brecklin?
First of all, I love hearing from our young leaders. And when I hear your words, Brecklin, I know our future is bright because it is that perspective on who we are and who we should be that is a sign of leadership and is something we should all aspire to be. Brecklin, when you think about the future, I do believe the future is bright. And it will be because of your leadership, and it will be because we fight for each person's voice through their vote. And we get engaged in this election. Because you have the ability through your work and through eventually your vote to determine the future of our country and what its leadership looks like.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Vice President Pence. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank the viewers, and have a good evening.